Endwalker, the newest expansion for Final Fantasy XIV, releasing in late 2021. Now, I pre-ordered this DLC because it came with kick-ass earrings, but also because after playing through Stormblood and slowly growing to hate this game, I wanted a change of pace with Shadowbringers and Endwalker. Now, I'm not stupid, and I understood that there were going to be issues with logging in on release, so I waited. And then I waited, and then I waited some more. And after waiting for 3 months, I decided to just resub and try the game out anyway. After all, how bad could it be after these kinds of reviews? Listen, I can forgive the server wait times. The world literally isn't producing enough chipsets and semiconductors to keep up with demand. Here's what I can't forgive. They fucked with my favorite classes again.
It felt so good going through the rotation.
It's false.
Current Summoner, it's a lot of Ruin 3.
No way.
There is no Ruin 3 spam here.
Pure fiction.
I think it's very easy to misunderstand an easy job to an easy to understand job.
No.
New Summoner is definitely easy to understand.
No.
Summoner up till now has been pretty convoluted and you had to deal with janky wonky crap.
It's false.
Like, why do I want to play a job that's harder just because I have to fight with the job to get it to do what I want it to do?
It's fiction.
Endwalker Summoner has much more to think about than current Summoner.
No way.
Endwalker Summoner has so much cooler stuff to do in dungeons.
Not a chance.
The buttons that you would push in a raid is completely different from the buttons that you would push in a dungeon.
Wrong.
In current Summoner, I'm doing the same thing all the time, pretty much.
You're wrong.
If you like current Summoner, would you like this new Summoner? And I think the vast majority is going to be yes. A resounding yes.
It's fiction.
So much so that it's going to bring a whole bunch of other people who've never even looked at casters before to play Summoner.
No.
Just take it from somebody who played it. You guys are going to like it.
Pure fiction.
They tampered with Summoner again. They somehow made it even less of a Summoner than it was before, and I'm going to explain why. Before I get into it, I fully understand that this video is going to be mildly controversial because it feels like about half of the community agrees with me, while the other half are dumbasses who don't actually understand why the other half are upset. And while I might joke and call them dumbasses, I fully and sincerely respect their opinions. If you like playing the new Summoner, fuck what I think, alright? Go play the game that you enjoy playing and ignore all the people telling you otherwise. It's fine. That being said, let's talk about new Summoner. Now, why don't I like the new Summoner? It's simple, they aren't a Summoner anymore and they're way too easy to play. The Summoner archetype has historically been that you micromanage your minions or pets or summons or whatever in order to make the most of your class abilities. Look at World of Warcraft's Warlock class. Even when the game was taking a turn for the worse, the developers still adhered to that policy. Warlock in WoW has always been consistent in what they've achieved. You had different pets for different situations, which made Warlock versatile and competent across different aspects of the game. Even Beastmaster hunters in WoW handle a pet class somewhat fine. Look at the Necromancer in Age of Conan. You control a horde of undead pets, with many of your abilities focused on supporting them. Remember City of Heroes and the Mastermind class? The best builds in City of Heroes revolved around taking a secondary power set that helped keep all of your pets alive, because they're the main source of your damage, period. That's how Summoner archetypes work in video games. That's the power fantasy. Controlling and managing minions to achieve a goal. The class is usually really difficult to play because micromanagement in a video game setting is pretty difficult to learn and adapt to. That's the point of the archetype. They're almost always paired with a high skill ceiling that players need to learn in order to fully utilize the class appropriately. Now, I know what you're thinking, Summoner and Shadowbringers didn't really hit that mark either, did it? And you would be correct. Final Fantasy XIV has no dedicated summon archetype class in the game, so the name Summoner is a bit of a misnomer. But I'd like to argue that pre-Endwalker Summoner was at least sort of reminiscent of the archetype, whereas the new class kit is basically just a bad caster with a low skill ceiling. So let's talk about what changed in Summoner and Endwalker that caused us to reach this point. How did the class play before? You'd make sure that every enemy had both of your DOT poison spells on them, Bio and Miasma, chunking away at their health, which also made your resource spending abilities deal more damage, like Fester. On top of that, you had off-global cooldown abilities that made your pet perform a special ability called EG Assaults. Every pet had different abilities, so which pet you had out was important. Titan gave you defensive buffs, Garuda dealt moderate damage in an AoE, and Ifrit dealt a ton of damage to a single target. Obviously I'm summarizing, but that was the general gist of the class. You'd have to manage your pets to make sure that you were casting your EG Assault for the damage, but you'd also have to make sure that you were maintaining stacks of Bio and Miasma because your Aetherflow abilities wouldn't do jack shit unless your target had your DOTs applied. It was an inherently fun class to play because you had a ton of tools to use in every aspect of gameplay. You're always doing something. Contrary to what people might think, there wasn't a lot of dead space in your rotation where you were just spamming Ruin over and over again. Summoner Resurrects were useful because healers were almost always focused on keeping party members alive, so a swift cast Resurrect kept Summoner relevant in raids and dungeons. Summoner is a DPS class, so they deal a lot of damage. And depending on the pet that they had out, they basically had an answer to every situation with the right tools. Single target damage? Use Ifrit. AoE? Garuda's going to be your best pick. Oops, are you about to take a ton of damage? Summon Titan and give yourself some extra HP temporarily. Summoner was a high skill ceiling, hard to learn, fun class to play properly. Am I going to say that it was the best class in the game? No. Was it really a summoner? Not really. There wasn't many ways to support your pet because your pet can't take damage anymore. However, we'll talk about that in a minute. So how does the class play now? Well, developers thought that the DOT skills were a little too hard to use, so they got rid of those. Also, the whole summoning the right pet for the job thing, yeah, that was too difficult to use too, so they got rid of that. I believe the developers' reasoning was, well, the summoner has too many abilities, so we wanted to simplify them. There's like 10 abilities in the goddamn kit. If you can't handle 10 abilities in a DPS rotation, you shouldn't be playing an MMO at all. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but the genre is way more complicated than that. Essentially, now you have one static pet, a dumb fucking carbuncle, because this game didn't force enough furry bait down your throat, which will transform throughout your DPS rotation. Most of the kit revolves around entering your Dreadworm trance to gain stacks of some gem-based resource that allows you to transform your pet into one of the three primals, Ifrit, Garuda, and Titan. At a high level, you also summon Bahamut when you go into your trance, which will deal a fair bit of damage, and later on you summon a Phoenix after your Bahamut, who, and if you guessed it correctly, you must be a genius, sits there and deals damage. Super late into your leveling, your primal transformations get stronger and look cooler, and that's it. There are no buffs to your minions because you have none. No upkeep or babysitting because there's nothing for you to worry about. The brunt of the kit revolves around transformations. You're not actually summoning a new pet, you're transforming your carbuncle into something else temporarily. Your permanent carbuncle doesn't even do anything anymore. It just sits there, looking at you with its cold, dead, lifeless eyes until you transform it into something else. I would be a lot more inclined to enjoy this class if I could have all three primals out at once. Let me throw out a massive burst of damage at the enemy and then just spam my new gemstone abilities and ruin or whatever for 20 seconds until my trance comes off cooldown again. The class literally has no ramp up time. It doesn't feel satisfying to play. It doesn't feel satisfying to nail a perfect DPS rotation. But Grayson, the summons change how your other abilities look. It makes your ruin look cool. I don't really care. I really don't. That's not what a summoner is to me. I don't want to play a class that used to be a goddamn summoner, but now plays like a bad casting class. I don't even really understand what the developers were trying to go for here. This class feels like it's missing an entire set of abilities that, I don't know, summon stuff for you to fight with? Did I even mention that the class still has its Aetherflow spending abilities, but now they don't have any damage bonuses from your DOT spell stacking, so they basically deal no damage and are essentially useless. Yeah, the developers really did a great job cutting the fat from the class, didn't they? But the class used to be janky, simplifying it is better for the game. Why? Why is a complex ability set considered janky and too difficult to use nowadays? Why don't people just say what they really mean and tell us, the class is too difficult for me to use properly because I'm not very good at video games, and I want the class dumbed down because I'm selfish, and I don't really want other people to have fun. Just be honest with us. We would all respect you a lot more. Not too much more, but more than zero, and mathematically speaking, any number greater than zero is infinitely more than zero. Not being good at something and throwing around the word janky at it doesn't work. Do we all even know what that word means? It means unreliable and of poor quality, but that's not how most players use that word, is it? New players assign that word to classes that they don't understand or are too difficult to use. You want an example of a real janky mechanic in this game? Look at the power creep through the expansions. The developers had to undergo a massive stat squish in Endwalker because players were growing too strong for their game. What kind of a developer allows players to grow too strong in an MMO? How the fuck does it even happen? What about the fact that the developers straight up removed an entire gear piece in Endwalker? No more belts because they don't really do anything. Also, it's totally not because we're trying to weaken players because their numbers are too large. Okay, thanks, bye. The developers said that the stat squish wouldn't change gameplay as a whole, but my instances feel longer. It feels like we're doing less damage than we were promised after the nerf. What about the weird chocobo system? Does anybody really enjoy force-feeding your chocobo different food to die at different colors? How about having to keep a stack of fucking lettuce in your inventory to use the chocobo out in the field? Can't use them in dungeons or raids though, because that would be too overpowered. If they straight up remove the chocobo combat system without telling us first, I guarantee it would take a couple of days for people to notice. That's how unimportant that system is. The people who want the classes in this game to be dumbed down are the exact reason why the game is never going to be innovative anymore. The developers don't want the game to appeal to everyone. They want the game to appeal to casual players, which, by the way, I have no problem with whatsoever. If that's your demographic, go for it. I don't care. I used to play a ton of Fusion Fallen Spiral Knights when I was younger. I'm fine with simplistic game systems. What I do care about is when you originally implemented a class with complex mechanics to appeal to a more seasoned MMO player, and then you take away those mechanics for simplicity's sake. If that player can no longer complain about the class being gutted like a dead fish because their complaints are drowned out in the deluge of new players who have zero idea what the fuck they're talking about because Final Fantasy XIV is their first MMO and they're basically children in the genre, that's what I take offense to. Not to mention the fact that developers who do this sort of thing are basically parasites. I mean, think about it. You hook in players with the promise of innovative gameplay with interesting mechanics and class variety, make them love the game, and then when casual players start hearing about the game from Asmongold and your player count skyrockets, you dumb down the classes that your original fanbase used to enjoy so that you can appeal to your newer players and make them feel special. World of Warcraft did it, and Final Fantasy XIV is no different. You might think that this doesn't affect you if you don't play Summoner, but you're wrong. The developers will come for your favorite class and rip it apart as soon as players who don't understand the class start complaining about it. For those of you who don't believe me, let me just remind you about Dark Knight. Do you remember when that class was fun to play? Yeah, me too. I had such high hopes for Dark Knight after Heaven's Ward, and all of those hopes were crushed when the developers took Dark Knight and stomped on them until they were nothing compared to the other tank classes. And by the way, they nerfed Dark Knight again in Endwalker. Why? Why do they keep doing this to the class? It's not like Dark Knight was overperforming compared to the other tanks. Every expansion since Heaven's Ward, the Dark Knight has gotten shafted over and over and over again. Why? Why do the fucking developers hate Dark Knight so goddamn much? It doesn't make any sense to me. Why remove their Darkside mechanic in Stormblood, the only mechanic that made them feel unique as a tank? Why do they not only not give any meaningful abilities to Dark Knight and Endwalker, they changed the class for the worst, making two of their off-global cooldowns share a cooldown for some unknown reason, while also nerfing Delirium into the ground. I don't get it. If the developers don't like the class, just remove it from the fucking game. Don't slowly torture it to death over the course of multiple expansions like a psychopath. Kill it fast and get it over with. I'm going to move on because this script is already way too long to convey the simple message that I'm trying to somehow spread in this video, and my blood pressure is getting too high for my own good. I could literally talk about Dark Knight giving a shaft for over an hour straight, but that's not the point here. I'm not saying that Summoner was a good class back in Shadowbringers, but it was at least fun to play, and it brought a lot more to the table as far as interesting class mechanics were concerned than what Endwalker did to the class. The same people who are going to enjoy Summoner and Endwalker are the same people who never played it back at Heavensward, when Summoner pets had health bars and could handle enmity for the Summoner. Does anyone else remember that? Anyone else remember when Titan was actually fucking useful? It's almost as if the Summoner's healing spell is a remnant from that bygone age when Summoner had a goddamn reason to need to heal targets. You know, that healing spell that nobody uses because it isn't nearly potent enough to be worth the MP cost? Yeah, that spell. That's what it was used for back in Heavensward, to heal your pets when you were alone. I'll extend an olive branch out here, okay? I don't think that complexity is always good. Ninja is a class that I'll probably never play because it looks way too complicated for its own good. Same with Blue Mage. I'm not saying that a class needs to be complicated for it to be fun, or that complexity is even necessary most of the time. What I am saying is that Summoner used to be complicated, and the developers simplified a class that had no business being simplified. Remove the DOT spells, fine. But keep the main bulk of the kit and add some more ways to summon stuff. It wasn't that hard to make the class better for Endwalker, and they somehow still fucked it up. Now, onto the final point I'm going to make for this video. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. Final Fantasy XIV hasn't had an actual improvement since Heavensward. Everything so far, everything that people praise and everything that people lose their minds over, is all just content. The game hasn't been improved in a very long time. Heavensward for me was the peak of Final Fantasy XIV. Stormblood was just bad, and Shadowbringers had a great story, but the developers still didn't improve the game on a mechanical level during that expansion. The game can appeal to casual players all at once, but at this rate it's never going to compete gameplay-wise with worse MMORPGs in the industry right now. Even games that I think are objectively worse than Final Fantasy XIV have better combat systems in place to make gameplay enjoyable. At this point, I think Final Fantasy XIV's player count is bloated, with bots and veteran players who are still subscribed because all of their friends are, and they all just hang out in Limsa Lominsa starting erotic RP chats and being a general nuisance to players who are, I don't know, playing the game. If you don't believe me, think about the player population you see in actual combat zones. How many players do you find out in the wild away from cities? A couple? Compare that to the insane population count inside cities, and you have your answer. This game is not an MMORPG anymore, it's a chat room with a lot of extra fluff. Most players are just going to rush through the newest story, and the rest of their time is spent sitting in town, killing my FPS, and waiting for their queue to pop. They don't go out and do fates, they don't go out and help new players, most of them don't even craft or gather, so they're not contributing to the game's economy all that much. This game can boast about player count all at once, but from what I've seen and from what I've actually experienced, the vast majority of players who still play this game after a year or so aren't actually playing. So why are we giving those players a voice in how this game is developed? It doesn't make any sense to me. And this is just the players. I'm not even addressing the developers. Still, to this day, 3.5 months after Endwalker's release, I'm still having insane server queue times. However, as I mentioned earlier, I can forgive them for this to some extent. I still think that they need to implement stricter policies against AFK players and bots, but whatever. You know what else they haven't done? Fixed the sliding animations. This game has been out for years and still your character will slide around during animations. Like the fucking technology to segregate an animation model hasn't been around since like 2012. Guild Wars 2 has perfect animations. Plenty of other games in the genre handle animations appropriately. Final Fantasy XIV doesn't. And I haven't even ranted about how Stormblood basically ruined the game from a story perspective, or how the community tries to paint themselves as supportive, but they're really not. I used to love this game, I really did, and I am having fun playing classes that are not Summoner. I'm having a decent time progressing through the Shadowbringers bridge, and I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of fun playing Shadowbringers, but mechanically, from a fundamental level, this game just isn't fun anymore. It's become a shadow of what it used to be. A popular shadow, but a shadow nonetheless. And I'm not going to devote time, energy, or money in a game that doesn't want to improve, it wants to stay popular. The moment that Final Fantasy XIV adds a reason for me to want to play, I will happily come back after my sub time runs out, because whatever it is that they think that they're trying to improve, they're not doing it correctly. Summoner being gutted was just the final straw in a massive pile of garbage that killed the camel 2 expansions ago. It bothers me when other games in the genre are trying to improve themselves. Guild Wars 2 is a fantastic example. It had a rough development history, but it's in a good place now. The newest expansion is a great step in the right direction. It's a mechanical improvement, something that Final Fantasy XIV has lacked for a very long time. I don't know. This video is probably not going to be well received, but I feel like a lot of the points I made here needed to be said and needed to be made. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments on what I've said so far. And I do appreciate it if you've made it this far listening to me ramble on for however long it took for me to make this point. I hope you guys all have a great day.